Imagine finding out that the person who made you suffer the most in your entire life, it was the same one that destroyed his marriage. This is the story of the greatest betrayal of my life. Now, I want to know from you. If you were in my place, what would you do?
My own brother, who always despised me, who always tried to put me down, I was having an affair with my wife. And the worst, my son may not even be mine. How was someone who grew up next to me able to betray me in this way? How did the woman who promised to be with me forever hide such a dirty secret? This is the story of the greatest betrayal of my life. And you won't believe what happened when I confronted them both. Ever since I was little, I always knew my family had a favorite son. And of course, that son was not me. My brother David always had everything he wanted. My mother made a point of treating him like a king, while I was just, well, a must. And the worst? I accepted that. But accepting a situation doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Have you ever felt that, no matter how hard you try, you are never enough for your family? Because that's exactly how I felt. Since I was a child, my mother forced me to take care of David, help him, defend him. But what about when I needed help? Total silence. I could be suffering. I could be bad. I could be hurt. None of that mattered. And as if favoritism wasn't enough, my brother wasn't exactly a loving brother. Quite the opposite. He teased me all the time, humiliated me, invaded my space, and no one did anything. You know that kind of person who can only feel good when they make someone else feel bad? That was David. He made jokes with me in front of friends, rummaged through my things, pushed me, until one day it crossed the line. One day he just walked into my room and took money from my wallet. I asked him to return it, and do you know what he did? He laughed in my face. Like I'm an idiot, anger took over me at that moment. For the first time I reacted, and that's when the dynamic changed. My father, who had always been a bit absent, finally realized that I couldn't take it anymore. And for the first time, he stood by me. That was enough for David to realize that I would no longer accept being treated like garbage. From that moment on, he walked away. But that didn't mean he had changed. He was still throwing hints. He was still trying to hit me. But now, I didn't care anymore. Finally, my life seemed to move on. But little did I know, David would still find a way to destroy everything I've built. When I finally thought that my life was coming together, that I had abandoned my brother behind, he managed to become a problem again. This time, it was no longer about childhood quarrels or silly disputes. It was about something much bigger, more calm. Let's take it one step at a time. I was finally free from that house. I went to college, made friends, lived my life. And most importantly, I met Karen. She was amazing, at least that's what I thought at the time. Intelligent, funny, she supported me. Everything I never had at home. I fell in love quickly, and shortly after, we got married. In my mind, this was my new beginning, a new life, a new family, away from the problems of the past. But you know that strange feeling that something is not right? That thing you feel but can't explain? I should have trusted that feeling, because that's how it all started. Small details that didn't make sense, discreet looks, interrupted conversations when I got close. Worse, this happened whenever Karen and David were in the same place. At first, I ignored it. I thought it was all in my head. After all, why would I distrust my own wife? But the signs began to become impossible to ignore. There was a day, for example, when I got home early and Karen was on the phone. When she saw me, she hung up right away and got nervous. I asked her who it was, and she said it was just a friend. But what caught me was her way. She had never reacted like this before. It was as if I had been caught red-handed. And then the excuses began. Oh, I'm tired. Oh, I'm out of time today. Oh, it's all in your head. But when I realized that even my brother started acting strange, that's when the penny dropped. Something was happening. I just didn't know that. In fact, the worst had happened a long time ago. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I was exaggerating. After all, I had won, right? I left that house, built my life, got married, had a beautiful son. I was happy, or at least, I thought I was. For years, I lived this illusion. Maria and I had our problems like any couple, but nothing that made me suspicious. And David? Good. We were never close, but over time, the childish fights were left behind. He seemed to have gone on with H. Shaw's life, and I followed mine, or at least that's what he wanted me to think. Time passed. My son was born, and I swore to myself that I would give him everything I never had. I wanted to be the father I never felt I had. But looking back, was he really my son? This doubt had never crossed my mind until that day, that damn day when everything fell apart. 3 months ago, Maria called me to talk. She said she had something serious to tell me. I already knew it wasn't a good thing. You could see it in her eyes. But I could never imagine what came next. She took a deep breath, looked me in the eyes and said, "I need to tell you something. Our son, it may not be yours." It was as if the floor had disappeared. My heart raced. My son. Could it be from another man? And not just any man. From my brother. The betrayal was already unbearable. But that was the kind of thing that destroys a person. And at that moment I realized my whole life had been a lie. At that moment I froze. My wife, the woman I loved, the mother of my son. He was telling me that he might not be mine. And the worst? The other man was my brother. My mind went blank. I wanted to believe it was a joke, that somehow I had heard it wrong. But no, it was real. I looked at Maria, trying to understand. How? When? And that's when she started telling everything. She said it all started years ago, since I introduced her to my family. She and David began to feel a connection, that's what she called it. At first, it was just a flirtation, but then, well, you already know where this went. They had an affair, a case that lasted years. And while I thought I was living a happy marriage, while I believed I had a family, they were betraying me behind my back. I felt my whole body tremble, blood boiling with rage. My own brother, he had already made my childhood hell, and now he managed to destroy my adult life as well. And Mary, she said she loved me, who chose me, that even though she had feelings for David, she wanted to be with me. What did that mean? That she did me a favor by staying married to me? What kind of justification is this? I didn't want to hear anything else. I took my things and left home. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't stay there anymore. That night I slept in a hotel. My cell phone kept ringing. Maria's messages, calls from her crying, asking me to come back. But I could only think of one thing. My son. What if it is not mine? If he's David's, what do I do? The next day, I made a decision. My family needed to know. My parents needed to know what David had done. And I was ready to expose this betrayal in the worst possible way. But I had no idea how my mother would react. And that would only make it even worse. At that moment, I knew I couldn't run away anymore. I needed to face the truth. I needed to face my brother. So I did what anyone would do in my place. I called my family and said I needed to talk to them. My mother, as always, was quick to defend David. "What do you want now? You know your brother has a busy life." That made me laugh. Even after everything, even without knowing what had happened, she was already defending him, but I didn't even bother to explain it over the phone. I wanted to talk, looking into his eyes. When I arrived at my parents' house, there they were. My mother, my father, and my wretched brother. David looked at me with that face of someone who doesn't care, as if he knew he had done something wrong, but just didn't care. I took a deep breath and threw the bomb. Maria told me everything. Your case, the possibility of my son being yours. Tell me, David, is that true? Silence. My mother looked at him, confused. My father was tense. And David, he laughed. He even tried to deny it at first. He said it was absurd, that Maria must be making things up. Until I repeated, She told me everything. That's when the mask fell. Out of nowhere, he changed his stance. He looked at me and said, "She always ran after me. It's not my fault if you didn't notice." My mother turned pale. She finally understood. The perfect son, the favorite son. It wasn't that perfect. The worst was not even the betrayal. That was the way David spoke, as if none of that mattered, as if destroying my marriage, my family, meant nothing to him. And at that moment, I realized there was nothing more to say. There was nothing left to save. My family, destroyed. My marriage, irreparable. My brother, dead to me. But there was still one last piece missing in this puzzle. And this piece, it was my son. After everything that happened, all the betrayals, all the lies, there was still a single unanswered question. Was my child really mine? I wanted to avoid that. I wanted to cling to the hope that, despite everything, he would still be my son. But how could I live with this doubt? I needed to know the truth. So without telling anyone, I took the DNA test. The days I waited for the result were the most distressing of my life. Every time I looked at my son, my heart broke. He called me dad. He hugged me. He trusted me. What if I had to say goodbye? Finally, the result arrived. My hands trembled as I opened that envelope. I took a deep breath and read the words that would change my life forever. And so, there it was, 99.9% chance of compatibility. He was my son. At that moment, I cried. But it wasn't just a cry of relief. It was a cry of pain, of anger, of everything I had been through. I was betrayed. I was deceived. My family was destroyed. But in the midst of all this tragedy, my son was still mine. He was not to blame. He did not ask to be born into this chaos, and as much as I wanted to erase all the past, I could never abandon him. So I made my decision. Maria, out of my life forever. David, he would never exchange a word with me again, but my son, he was mine, and I would do anything to make sure he had a better life than the one I had. I couldn't change the past, but I could guarantee that his future would not be marked by the same pain that I experienced. And this, it was my last decision. Now I want to know from you.
If you were in my place, what would you do? Do you think he made the best decision? Or should I have done something different? If it were up to you, would you forgive this betrayal or cut these people out of your life forever? Leave your opinion in the comments because I really want to know what you would do in this situation. And if this video has hooked you this far, leave the like because it helps me a lot.